met you, my friend. Now you turn a 360 on me.
180, you stupid spaghetti-slurping cretin. 180. If I did a 360, I'd go completely around and end up back where I started.
What?
Trust me.
The new Jack Slater opens this weekend at the Odyssey.
Mike, I didn't know that. They killed second cousin. Big mistake. Jack Slater 4.
Well, I'm checking the print tonight. I could arrange for you to gain admittance.
See it before it opens?
Yeah. When I was about your age, Harry Houdini played this theater, and my pop took me backstage to see him after the show. And he made a gesture, and all of a sudden, this was in his hand. And he said to me, "This is a magic ticket. It's a passport to another world. It was mine, and now it's yours. And now it's yours."
Who the hell are you?
Don't shoot me. I'm Daddy Madigan. I'm a kid. This is happening. This is really happening. Houdini wasn't faking.
Who is this twerp, and where's that smile on his face?
I don't even know this kid.
You seem to know a lot about us.
I know a lot about what's going on.
Meet your new partner.
This ticket is magic, and it really works. I was in the movie. I was with Jack Slater every step of the way.
This time, I never used it because I was too frightened.
I just found out I was imaginary. I mean, how would you feel if you found out that somebody made you up?
Benedict's here too, and he's got the ticket.
That madman with the glass eye?
If that little turd, Daniel Madigan, can move through parallel worlds, I can move through parallel worlds. In and out. In, steal whatever I want. And out again. Impossible to catch.
How the hell are you gonna get back?
Clear! Come on, Jack!
Don't touch me! Everybody down! Stop shouting! I'm not deaf!
Last Action Hero exploded its way onto the big screen on the 18th of June 1993 and hit UK cinemas on the 30th of July. Directed by John McTiernan, best known for directing Predator and Die Hard, the film was produced for a large budget of $85 million and would only go on to gross $137 million worldwide. Arnold Schwarzenegger was at the height of his success thanks to Terminator 2 from 1991, which made over $500 million at the box office. And Columbia Pictures were pushing to make Last Action Hero even bigger and more successful, but things didn't pan out that way. At the time of its release, the film was billed as the next great summer action movie, and many movie insiders predicted it would be a huge blockbuster. John McTiernan said from the moment he saw the big ticket of 93 in the first test ad campaign, he anticipated that it would provoke a negative reaction, that it was just arrogant. Arnold tried to persuade his co-producers to postpone the film's release date in the USA by 4 weeks, as Jurassic Park was already anticipated to dominate that summer. To add further to the problems, the film had some bad press before release due to a poor test screening, and when it finally landed, it arrived at the number 2 spot, as Jurassic Park would week after week draw people back in to see it. The critics weren't too enthusiastic about Last Action Hero, with Variety calling it a joyless, soulless machine of a movie. Entertainment Weekly wrote, "Last Action Hero makes such a strenuous show of winking at the audience and itself that it seems to be celebrating nothing so much as its own awfulness." Sight and Sound magazine said, "This is a film that cannot imagine existing without the very same stock situations and characters it denigrates. It's a perfect example of cinematic self-hatred." Impact magazine, who you would think would love the movie, weren't too impressed, saying, "The only conclusion you can finally draw that the fictional Schwarzenegger showed as much bad judgment in choosing his latest project as he did the real one, or as Jack Slater himself might have quipped, big mistake. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert both gave it a thumbs down. Gene enjoyed chunks of it, but felt that Arnold was wanting to move on from the genre. Roger also agreed, but he said it didn't evoke the mystery of the barrier between audience and screen the way Woody Allen did in The Purple Rose of Cairo, and a lot of the time it simply seems to be standing around commenting on itself. In the Netflix documentary Arnold, he said he felt very upset and was embarrassed by the poor box office, and didn't want to speak to anyone for a week.
Magic ticket my ass, McBain.
Last Action Hero was not the only film that year that mocked the action genre, with Loaded Weapon 1 hitting cinema screens in February of that year, and would prove more profitable due to its smaller budget and bigger returns in box office earnings.
Give me a name. Weren't your parents supposed to do that?
Despite not being a financial disaster and not the box office bomb the press had pushed at the time, John McTiernan felt the advertising campaign was terrible. He felt if they hadn't overhyped the movie, it would have been a lot easier to sell it, and if they had come on a little more quietly, it probably would have worked out better for them. With Schwarzenegger being an executive producer on the film, he had a say in many aspects of the film's production, including its merchandise. Arnold said, "When the toy people showed up with their prototypes of a Jack Slater doll, I vetoed the combat weapons they proposed. I said, this is the 90s, not the 80s. Instead of wielding a flamethrower, the toy Jack Slater threw a punch and said, big mistake," which was his tagline against the bad guys. On the toy packaging it said, "Play it smart, never play with real guns." There was also video games that will be explored later, a big promotional tie-in with Burger King, and NASA picked up the film for the first ever paid advertisement in outer space, which was Arnold's favourite slice of advertising. They planned to paint Last Action Hero and Arnold Schwarzenegger on the side of the rockets, and then held a national sweepstakes whose winners would get to push the launch button, though it was postponed and eventually cancelled. There was even a 4-story tall inflatable statue of Jack Slater on a raft just off the beach at Cannes Film Festival. And Arnold set a personal record and gave 40 interviews to the press in a single 24-hour period to promote it. With Last Action Hero not doing the numbers Columbia Pictures wanted, things weren't all bad, as it would prove successful on home video when it hit VHS in January of 1994. And since its release, many have gone back to the film to reappraise it, with many commenting on it being one of Arnold's best performances and its strength as a comedy. The writer Zach Penn would get to revisit the concept of going into a movie with Ready Player One, and joked during the scene with the characters going into The Shining that it would have been cool to go into the world of Last Action Hero. The original concept for Last Action Hero was developed by young screenwriters Adam Leff and Zach Penn, who first met in a film class at university. After they graduated, they moved to LA in hopes of becoming screenwriters, and found work straight away working for Quincy Jones. Zach had an idea for a reverse Purple Rose of Cairo, where a fictional character enters the real world. With Zach's take on it, it would mock the action genre, which was incredibly popular by the early 90s. He and Adam researched the genre, renting all the movies they could find, and went to the cinema to see the latest of what Hollywood had to offer. Adam felt there was nothing new, with the same plots repeating themselves. It got to a level where it became humorous. You knew everything that went on in those action pictures, so they started making a checklist of all the tropes. Who is the second most evil bad guy? And one of the little rules is, that guy always dies last. You would think the main guy would die last, but no. Zach said we had all these other little rules, like, why is it so personal? And at what point does it become personal? Who's his partner? His friend who betrays him? The list went on. Their idea was to take a kid from the real world who would be transported into the film world due to an evil projectionist. The writers felt Hollywood action movies were serving as a replacement for kids' anger, and the kid in the script always wanted to do something to make up for his father's death. Zach and Adam found themselves with an agent called Chris Moore, who had connections to TriStar Pictures. Chris was of a similar age to the writers, and he also enjoyed action movies, and he read the script after being pestered by his colleagues to read it. By page 45, he loved it. He said, "I cannot wait to sell this movie, and if anybody else was reading it right now, they'd be having the same reaction, or they are stupid." Moore said in an interview about the history of the production in 2015 by Kelly Conda, "I saw it as a modern-day Wizard of Oz. The kid has a problem with his family, his father has left, and he's not getting on with his mum. And instead of getting whisked away to Oz, he does what most kids today would want to do, which is to escape into a movie. It's what I fell in love with when I read the script. When my parents got divorced or life was hard, I would find myself in a movie theatre, sitting in the dark, thinking about my life, wondering what I'm supposed to go do, and hoping that one of those guys on screen would just look out at me for 5 seconds and say, 'Hey, you're gonna be all right.' When I read the script, that's what this kid was, and the script argued, listen, movies are just movies, These guys are just heroes, don't put so much weight into it. Buzz had already started to build around the script, and offers were coming in from the various studios. Carolco, who had produced the Rambo films Total Recall and Terminator 2, hated the script, however, as they didn't like the writer's cynical take on the genre they had championed. The competition over the script was so insane that Sony Pictures Entertainment's two different production arms, Columbia and TriStar, unknowingly bid against each other. Once they figured that out, TriStar backed off, Columbia lowered its overall bid, and the script ultimately sold for $350,000, without Schwarzenegger officially attached yet, as Zack and Adam's script did have Arnold in mind, with him being called Arno Slater. Chris Moore felt that by page 65 in the script, when the kid arrived in the movie world, the rules got a little twisted and felt a rewrite was needed, and he passed it on to Shane Black to get some feedback and perhaps get him to redo sections of the script. Shane liked the idea of Last Action Hero and committed to at least produce it, as he liked some of the writing, but he didn't want to take the assignment to rewrite it. Shane brought on actor and writer David Arnott to help with reshaping the script. When David read it, it dawned on him that they really had a chance to make the Wizard of Oz of action movies, the E.T. of action movies. What if an action movie wasn't about any of the action? Shane and David loved the concept, but felt changes were needed and set the third act in the real world. The original writers Zack and Adam wanted to be involved in the process, and Shane early on wanted them involved, and felt bad to be in this situation, but soon Zack and Adam's feedback was being ignored, as Shane and David felt their ideas were better. Zack felt it was surreal that the guy they parodied in their script was now rewriting them. Shane wrote Danny to be a little older. He felt he should be a wise ass, like Anthony Michael Hall from 16 Candles. Shane didn't like cute kids. They are not darlings, they are arseholes, he said in an interview. With Zack and Adam still in the loop and offering feedback, Zack said after a few weeks, Shane started to resent them asking questions. Zack hated the opening of the new draft, a scarred serial killer chucking a kid off the roof of the building. It's not even an exciting action scene, it's just awful, a horrible scene. They added mobsters and tried to make it a parody of James Bond movies. Some of it's a parody of action movies, and some of it's a parody of buddy cop noirish movies. It's pretty astounding to see how badly they screwed it up. As Zack and Adam had written Arnold in mind for the main lead, they never thought they would get him to agree to take part. The studio had thrown around names like Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme, but in January of 1992, Columbia executives Penn, Leff and Shane Black met with Arnold Schwarzenegger and his agent, and the studio gave Arnold everything he wanted: a $15 million salary, complete veto power over every aspect of production, and the promise to rewrite the script to make his character more three-dimensional and kid-friendly. David Arnott would later point out that Arnold had signed on based on his and Shane's rewrite, not Zack and Adam's original script. They would eventually go through the WGA arbitration to determine credit, and Leff and Penn ended up with a story by, and Black and Arnott with screenplay by. Many directors were considered, with the likes of Robert Zemeckis, Richard Donner and John McTiernan. John would turn it down at first, but later changed his mind. Zack Penn always felt it should be either Zemeckis or John Landis, guys who had a history of pulling genres apart, someone from the outside to mock the conventions of action movies than it is for the people who created them in the first place. John McTiernan said the script had so much venom that he loved it, but he did want another pass at it, with William Goldman, fresh off Misery, to rewrite the script for over 4 weeks for $1 million. He changed the satanic projectionist into a kindly old man, promoted the secondary villain, and made the boy a preteen instead of a full-on teenager. Goldman's work went uncredited, and he was eventually rewritten by uncredited writers such as Carrie Fisher. Shane Black commented on the studio panicking and ordering rewrites, saying, "Back in those days, that kind of thing was an insurance policy for keeping your job at an executive level. A script would be questionable, and the trembling executive would give it to a famous writer with $1 million, so he could say, yeah, it's fortified now, we've given it vitamins, wait, it needs the woman's touch, give it to Carrie Fisher." It just made people breathe easier, throwing money at this enormous behemoth. Even if the movie sucked, now they could say, it's not our fault. For the cast members, we have Austin O'Brien as 10-year-old Danny Madigan, who was a big fan of the Slater franchise. Austin had his first role in The Lawnmower Man and will later star in My Girl 2, Apollo 13, and one of the worst sequels ever made, Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace. The late Robert Prosky plays Nick the Friendly Projectionist, who has become a sort of father figure to Danny. Robert was a fantastic character actor who had appeared in many classic movies: Thief, The Keep, The Great Outdoors, Gremlins 2, and after this would star in Miracle on 34th Street. The always great Charles Dance plays Mr. Benedict, Vivaldi's right-hand man. Charles had played a villain in the Eddie Murphy film The Golden Child, and around this time appeared in Alien 3. Charles is probably best known to modern audiences for his role in the Game of Thrones series. Tom Noonan plays as the Ripper, the main antagonist of Jack Slater 3. He also appears as himself at the Jack Slater 4 premiere. Tom was best known for roles in Manhunter, The Monster Squad, and as Kane in RoboCop 2. We have the late Rick Dukeman as Tom Noonan's agent. Rick starred in The Burbs, Groundhog Day, and had a minor role in Die Hard. Mercedes Ruehl plays Irene Madigan, Danny's mum. Mercedes had appeared in many TV shows and films, such as The Secret of My Success, Married to the Mob, and The Fisher King. She also maintained a successful career on stage. F. Murray Abraham plays John Practice, Jack's friend, who Danny doesn't trust as he killed Mozart in Amadeus. Bridget Wilson plays Whitney Slater, Jack's daughter. This would be Bridget's first feature film. She would go on to star in Billy Madison, Mortal Kombat as Sonya, and I Know What You Did Last Summer. She would then go on to marry tennis pro Pete Sampras. Frank McCree plays Lieutenant Decker, Slater's shouty, short-tempered supervisor. Frank also popped up in Loaded Weapon 1, basically playing the same fast-talking, shouty character.
Wait a minute! I'm the captain here! I do all the yelling!
The late Anthony Quinn plays Tony Vivaldi, the main antagonist of Jack Slater 4. He drives Benedict mad with his frequent butchering of common phrases. Tony was a big star of the 50s and 60s, and appeared in many classic movies such as Lust for Life and Lawrence of Arabia. And we also have acting legend Ian McKellen as Death, emerging from the film The Seventh Seal as Danny's ticket falls outside the cinema in New York. For the smaller roles, we have Joan Plowright, who plays the English teacher. She shows her class the 1948 film adaptation of Hamlet, which starred her husband, Laurence Olivier. Art Carney as Frank Slater, Jack's second cousin. This was Carney's final film role. Also, the late Professor Tanaka, credited as the tough Asian man, plays Vivaldi and Benedict's bodyguard. He had popped up in many action movies such as Missing in Action 2, The Running Man, and Black Rain. And finally, the doctor who treats Slater near the end was Larry Ferguson, who made his career as a script doctor, and he was one of the most successful at the time. When it came to the film's cameos, Columbia Pictures handled a lot of the arrangements of getting the many Hollywood stars to appear in the film, mainly for their appearance for the premiere in the real world. For the list of cameos, we have Tina Turner as the Mayor, Sharon Stone as her character from Basic Instinct, Robert Patrick as the T-1000, Sylvester Stallone, though only his likeness as the Terminator on the poster promoting Terminator 2, as a reference to Schwarzenegger and Stallone's rivalry, Angie Everhart as a video store clerk, Schwarzenegger's then wife Maria Shriver, Little Richard, Entertainment Tonight host Lisa Gibbons, and Chris Connolly, Jim Belushi, Timothy Dalton, though hard to spot in the background, Damon Wayans, Chevy Chase, Melvin Van Peebles, Jean-Claude Van Damme, MC Hammer, pop group Wilson Phillips, who I failed to spot, Danny DeVito as the voice of Whiskers, the cartoon cat, Colleen Camp as Officer Ratcliffe, Arnold's close friend Franco Columbo has his name appearing during the opening credits as the director of Jack Slater 4. In the behind-the-scenes footage, you can see Tony Curtis and James Cameron, who can't be seen in the final edit. And Humphrey Bogart gets a cameo. When they made this film, it was still 30 years after he had died, and it was apparently very difficult and expensive to insert the old footage. Once John McTiernan committed to the project, it was 8 months until it was released, with 6 months spent shooting the picture. John said the head of the studio couldn't decide whether this was an action movie or a kids movie. I was getting pushed in a lot of directions. When I was sent the script, the thing I liked was that it was wildly irreverent, but that was all getting watered down. John went out of his way to shoot the entire script, but soon began to realise that he felt the narrative could have been condensed, and it started to become a challenge to think of ways to shorten it with a tight schedule. For Jack Slater's car, they tried several different models, and did testing with Arnold to see which car would suit him. McTiernan had wanted the car from the Thomas Crown affair. Unfortunately, Arnold was too big for it, so they ended up going with the car that was actually featured in the script. John wasn't happy with some of the production design. The kid's home, for example, he felt was too big. John wanted to cut it way in half. He felt it didn't seem real for a flat in New York, as John had lived there, and it seemed way too big for a family who was clearly on a small income. The designer had made it look orange with the wallpaper. John didn't know why. He felt it should have been dark green. The real world and the fictional world should be visually different. The exterior stuff around New York, John was very happy with. This is the tone of the real world and how it should be, he said, cold and wet, whereas the fantasy movie world was colourful and warm and made it so appealing to the kid. John would get his way with the apartment for when Slater enters the real world, and you see the kitchen is very small and only 2 people can fit in the room, which made it believable in his eyes. Sony were desperately wanting Last Action Hero to be the biggest movie in the world, but John felt the story should have been played on a smaller scale, and having cameos didn't help the movie, and he found it distracting, and the social aspects of the story got handicapped. John liked having a smaller crew, where everyone got to chip in to help, but as the studio wanted everything first rate, he said things got out of hand, and with the mechanics of filming, it became foolishly expensive. Austin O'Brien recalled years later in an interview about the challenges of the shoot, "I do remember that the deeper we got, John looked more tired and more haggard. When we got something right, he'd turn into a little kid and start jumping around, but there was one day I got a sense of how under the gun he was. We'd built a New York skyline inside the studio, and I was hanging from a gargoyle, wearing a harness. It was so tight that I literally couldn't breathe, but I was too nervous to say anything, and I passed out for a few seconds. People were cutting my clothes off, and it got kind of scary. But I do remember McTiernan coming up afterward and saying, 'In situations like these, I don't care what's happening, you tell me and we'll fix it. Don't be afraid. You haven't done anything wrong, but we cannot afford to stop shooting.'" Schwarzenegger said in his biography that he and John were having a drink after shooting until 3 in the morning one night in New York, and John said, "What we are really making here is E.T. When I heard that, I had a sinking feeling that maybe the whole PG-13 thing was a mistake. Even though we had a kid co-star in the movie, people might not buy me doing a family-friendly action film." John was struggling to find the right tone, and in the audio commentary for the film, he felt he got it right some of the time, but he admitted he didn't have the courage to be more of a smartass with the directing and telling the story. He didn't find the right prose style for the movie. He needed a more silly style, and not to make it confusing for the audience. Is it deliberately funny, or is it an action movie? It should have felt more magical. Shane Black and David Arnott were asked to come back during the last month and a half of filming to help rewrite the scenes as the budget was spiralling out of control. Shane said, "I declined. We'd been fired, and now they wanted us to fix up the explosions and helicopter scenes. I considered it an insult to my professional pride." Once shooting finished, the toughest challenge began by going through all the footage, as John McTiernan shot the entire script. Over the next 3 months, the editors worked 18-hour days, 6 days a week. Arnold did his best to boost morale by hiring professionals to routinely massage the stressed necks of the editors. Columbia Pictures wanted to test the movie with an audience, which was common practice, and in May a surprise test screening was held. The movie was very rough and clearly unfinished, running to 2 hours and 20 minutes. The audio was poorly mixed, so you couldn't really hear the dialogue clearly. By the end, the audience were bored. The crowd reacted so negatively that the producer Mark Canton seized the comment cards and had them shredded, rather than let the film's star or director see them. Mark would later say, "I don't want the director, who had literally been working 18-hour days, and our star to come up with 14 more ideas that would take 3 weeks to shoot. We didn't have 3 weeks." The production schedule was so tight by this point they couldn't take on any more advice and were forced to fly blind without feedback to finish the edit. They would remove roughly 9 minutes of footage that would turn up on the 4K Blu-ray, which would extend bits of dialogue as Slater and Danny look around for the house. Visiting Slater's other apartment, in the real world seeing news reports of crimes by gangsters from movies as the ticket has been used. We see Danny and Slater scoping out cinemas to find Benedict, and a bunch of kids think Slater is Arnold. Danny figures out they need to go to the premiere of Jack Slater 4 to find Benedict. We see Benedict in a taxi with the Ripper, a few bits of dialogue between Danny and Slater as Danny is holding onto the side of the building. We then see Danny's mother turn up near the end and wonders where Slater is as they walk off down the street as it begins to snow, which is how the movie was supposed to end. Shane Black felt the movie was a mess. Black said what they made was a jarring random collection of scenes. The casting of the little boy was one of the absolute misfires of Western culture. Also, they rewrote every line of ours, and I don't like the dialogue they wrote. Chris Moore said that nobody took responsibility to look at the dailies and say, "You know what, this is all over the place." From the original script to what it became, there was no one single vision, because you had Shane Black writing, Arnold Schwarzenegger starring, and John McTiernan directing, and they were all trying to be so polite and courteous and respectful of each other's opinions. Nobody stepped up and said, "Listen, this movie to me is this. This is what we should do." Shane Black was apologetic years later about having to rewrite Zach and Adam's script. Shane said, "Zach seemed to think that David and I ruined his script, but I was actually quite fond of what we came up with." Arnott said, "Maybe this sounds arrogant, but I think Shane and I made Last Action Hero a much better movie, a much better script than what Zach and Adam wrote." For the plot, we are introduced to Danny, who is obsessed with action films and spends his time obsessing over the magic of cinema in his local theatre in New York, which is on its last legs and is due to be demolished. While skipping school to watch Jack Slater 3, the old projectionist Nick, who has worked at the theatre for many years, invites him to a preview of Jack Slater 4 at midnight. Danny can't believe it. Danny is later told off by his mum for skipping school again, and while she works late, he gets bored waiting around for midnight. He attempts to leave his house, but he is robbed, but the guy soon realises he is poor and has nothing of value to steal. Danny reports the crime and is told to go home by his mother. He instead runs to the cinema where Nick has been waiting patiently. Nick reveals the history of the cinema where the famous magician Houdini once performed. Houdini gave Nick a magic ticket that could transport you to another world. He rips the ticket and gives Danny the stub as he begins to film. Shortly into it, the ticket begins to work, and Danny is transported into the fictional world and lands in Slater's car during a high-speed chase. Slater takes Danny to the LAPD headquarters, where Danny begins to point out the rules of this world, the tropes of the genre. There are too many attractive women around, and for Slater to not trust certain actors because they play bad guys in other movies. Slater dismisses this as Danny's imagination. Slater's supervisor, Lieutenant Decker, assigns Danny as his partner and instructs them to investigate mafia boss Tony Vivaldi. As Danny knows about Tony and his connection to the death of Slater's cousin, as he saw the opening of the movie and its location, they pay Tony a visit. His henchman, Mr. Benedict, is surprised how Danny knows so much, so he and his hired goons follow them to Slater's home and spring an attack. During the battle, Benedict unknowingly gets hold of the magic ticket and discovers that it can transport him into the real world, where the bad guys can win. Slater and Danny follow him and discover Benedict plans to kill Arnold Schwarzenegger at the premiere of Jack Slater 4. Last Action Hero arrived in the early days of digital compositing. The Abyss and Terminator 2 pushed the FX world into the next generation, with computer graphics thanks to ILM. Last Action Hero would make use of many top FX houses, with Sony Imageworks, Richard Greenberg Associates, Boss Film, Fantasy 2, Visual Concepts Engineering, and even ILM for some digital work. Due largely to Schwarzenegger's availability, the project was under the gun time-wise from the very beginning. Though slated for a summer 1993 release, the film did not have key production and effects staffs assembled until the previous fall. They started with 105 effects shots, which expanded to 150. Ultimately, 20 or 30 of those shots were omitted. The effects team had only about 4 weeks of pre-production, and most of that time they were dealing with the budget. Richard Greenberg Associates took on the lion's share of the digital effects work. They purchased equipment according to the needs of the project. The network they had included fully loaded Silicon Graphic workstations, and Apple Macs running a combination of in-house and off-the-shelf software. They also had access to an IBM Power Visualization System, which ran their own 3D software. Sony Pictures Imageworks, which had been set up in 1992 as Sony Pictures Entertainment Digital Productions, was a research and development facility that focused on exploring ways in which computers could assist filmmakers. With early 1993, the name was changed, and also the change in direction for the company, and they were now devoted to producing digital effects, and added over 180 gigabytes of disk space to the workstations they already had in order to gear them towards digital compositing. John Sullivan was interviewed for Cinefex magazine and talked about the difficult process matching the black and white footage with Hamlet. John said Dean Semler, our director of photography, really liked the rich look of an original black and white negative, but some of the sequences were shot in colour, so we had to go to the computer to convert that footage back to black and white. Conversely, we had to colorize some of the black and white for specific shots, where they wanted a burst of colour, and gun bursts were augmented to give them a more saturated look. Much of the digital scanning work for the film was realised by CineSight, a newly formed division of Eastman Kodak, which made use of the high-resolution Cineon film scanning system. Apparently most scanners around that time were limited to 2,000 line resolution, but with the Cineon scanner, they had 4,000 lines of data available. Last Action Hero isn't a big visual effects movie. Large chunks are done within camera with your straightforward action scenes, with explosions and stunts, etc. The opening act with Slater escaping from the house as it explodes is one of my favourite on-screen explosions. So perfectly shot and executed. You can see the obvious shift in the grading when the digital work kicks in due to the change in resolution, for example when Slater and Danny go into the real world, and the ambitious shot with Slater slowly falling from the lift as it breaks off. This whole sequence is the standout piece with the incredible stunt work. The wobbliest effect for me is when they reference E.T. with Danny on the bike. It's never looked great. But overall, the work they did at the time was to a very high level, considering the time constraints they had. composer Michael Kamen would provide the score to Last Action Hero. Kamen was best known for his work on Highlander, Die Hard, and the recent hit Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. His score would incorporate themes to homage the action genre, even his own work, with nods to Lethal Weapon.
2 days to retirement.
As the film had such a quick turnaround, there is little info on Kamen's process of writing the score to Last Action Hero, but he did mention in an interview back in the late 90s about his involvement with big budget productions that turned out a mess. He said Last Action Hero was an attempt at making an action film for kids that was preaching to kids that this is not important, that it's more important to be a kid than it is to be an action hero, and it was a noble failure. Kamen further added, "I have no problems with that. At this point in my life, the last thing I was going to do was take on an action film, and the studio came to me because I was known for action films, and they said, we have this Schwarzenegger vehicle we'd like you to do," and I was like, oh shit, I don't want an action film. And I read the script and I said, you know what, I'll do this is great. And the script was great, but they ran out of time. In 1992, Dolby introduced Dolby Digital with the release of Batman Returns. Sony would develop their own new digital sound format for cinema with Sony Dynamic Digital Sound, or SDDS for short, and Last Action Hero would be the first to take advantage of it. As Dolby went with a 5.1 surround sound speaker setup, Sony went with 8 channels of sound, with 5 at the front, 2 at the rear and 1 dedicated to the bass. This format never made its way to home cinemas and was the least popular with auditoriums, mainly due to the cost of the install. Films had to be mixed in 8 channels instead of the 5.1 option from Dolby and DTS, and with how the sound was printed on the film, it was prone to more damage. I personally never got to experience SDDS, as only a few select UK cinemas had the option, but I was told a number of times by other projectionists when I was working as one in the mid-2000s that it was the best option, especially when the film took full advantage of the channels. Michael Kamen did a great job for the limited time he had. For a film that is uneven with its tone, Michael stays in one direction and sticks to the heart of the story, and gives Slater a rock guitar theme tune that is woven into the orchestral mix, which has those moments of magic and solid action. To be honest, the score does a lot of the heavy lifting in places. With Kamen's rock background, we have artists such as AC/DC, Alice in Chains, Megadeth, Def Leppard, Anthrax and Aerosmith contributing songs. Arnold would feature in the AC/DC music video for the song Big Gun. He appears in the audience, then gets on stage and plays the guitar, providing hilarious results. The score arrived on CD at the time with 12 select tracks on Kamen's work, and a separate soundtrack with all the rock and metal songs. Kamen's full score would get remastered and released in 2024 from La La Land Records on a 2 CD set. Last Action Hero is not Michael Kamen's best work, but there are of course flourishes of great music from him, especially for Danny and when Slater returns to his own world. It's very John Williams in its style and a wonderful piece of music. For the tight schedule, Kamen did an incredible job. It's not his standout piece from the 90s, but there is enough in there to enjoy it by itself, and plenty of recognisable cues that once heard, they will make you think of Last Action Hero. Video games based on movies were very common in the 90s, and Last Action Hero would be no exception to make its way to the home computers and consoles. Sony ImageSoft would handle the distribution of the game to the Amiga, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, NES, Game Boy and Game Gear, with their development handled by Bit Studio for the consoles and Psygnosis and the Dome for the Amiga and DOS PC. Rich Robinson, an executive producer at Sony ImageSoft, oversaw the filming of Last Action Hero as well as the development of the game adaptation. He provided the various developers with a script for the film to help form the basis of the game. Columbia Pictures also provided stills from the film, which helped the game artists. Some developers saw some rough cuts of the film so they can make alterations to their game to keep it more faithful. Versions of the game were planned for the Sega CD and Master System, but these ultimately were not released. The Sega CD version was to include motion video footage from the film. However, because of the limited film footage, the team had to create some of their own footage for the CD version, using Silicon Graphics computers. But as mentioned, the game would never come to pass. Despite playing a prominent role in the movie, the character Danny is not playable, as Columbia Pictures did not want to have a small boy surrounded by violence. He only appears in the basic cutscenes. Peter Barron, a programmer at Bit Studio, was disappointed by the demands. In an interview he said, "The game had so much promise, I was really fired up about it. I'd been given a very clear design document and asked to fill in some of the blanks. Here was a chance to really put some innovation into a big licensed game. we were well into development and started to add some awesome action sequences. Then the hammer came down from the licensees, we weren't allowed to use any weapons on the main character. It left us with a fighting game with 3 combat moves, no weapons, no specials, no effects. We had to redesign all of the encounters to permit hand-to-hand fighting, and spent so much time doing the level revamps that all of the interesting sequences got ditched. I celebrated finishing that project by spending £200 on a night in a posh hotel in Leicester Square, and £60 getting so drunk that I couldn't even see the film's premiere the next day. When the game hit the various home platforms, the reviews were universally negative. The critics pointed out and complained about the poor and ugly graphics, and that it was overall incredibly boring to play. The Amiga version received a battering from the magazines, with some calling it utter trash and one of the worst games ever made. The Mega Drive and SNES ports are the most common. Though originally developed for the Sega console, the SNES version is a slightly tweaked version, making it a tad easier, but both have a timer in the corner that gives you a very limited amount of time to complete the first stage, making it frustrating to play. Plus they both have dreadful music. The Amiga game is a trashy scrolling beat-em-up that is embarrassing to watch in action. The NES, Game Gear and Game Boy versions probably offer the most variety in level design, and are maybe worth a playthrough for 10 minutes. The PC-DOS version is probably the most intriguing, with GTA-style driving levels and some clunky one-on-one combat. Overall, these are weak licensed games, ruined from the get-go by the studio and Arnold by restricting the violence and the use of weapons. Arnold would certainly change his tune come the console ports of True Lies. I first became aware of Last Action Hero just before its theatrical release. I went in to see Jurassic Park on its opening weekend at the MGM Cinema in Cambridge in the summer of 1993, and as I was in the foyer, I saw a giant cardboard standee for Last Action Hero. It looked amazing, but I would soon forget about it as I became obsessed with Jurassic Park that summer, and I was of an age where I had to be taken to the cinema by my parents. And Last Action Hero was rated 15. There was no chance of me seeing it as a 10-year-old, so I would eventually stumble across it on VHS. By this point I had heard it didn't live up to expectations. The video game magazines who had covered the ill-fated game had mentioned the underwhelming results of the film. As a kid and being stupid, I thought this film would be Arnold's last action film due to the title. It's hard to think back over 30 years ago to reflect on how I felt about it at the time. I'm sure I enjoyed parts of it, but I don't recall rewatching it that much, so it probably didn't interest me a great deal. I didn't really give it another go until DVD, and I was now in my early 20s and I loved the film. A lot of the humour must have gone over my head as a kid, or I didn't understand what the film was trying to do, but now I totally got it and appreciated it for what it was, but I knew it didn't quite hit the mark in areas, and it didn't quite work as a whole piece. Now the concept of Last Action Hero is brilliant. Who hasn't dreamt of being sucked into the movies and sharing an adventure with your favourite actor? It's a clever idea, and I can see why so many wanted to be involved with it and saw its potential. But the end results don't fully embrace what the film is selling. It's more than happy to point out the typical tropes of the genre for comedic effect, but don't really take advantage of it. There is little opportunity to bend the rules to get a one-up on the bad guys. It could have gone down the route of Who Framed Roger Rabbit to showcase the movie world and the crazy rules you could use to your advantage. Despite Shane Black's views on the casting and writing of Danny, I thought Austin did a really good job. His on-screen chemistry works really well with Arnold, and for a young actor he shows a lot of maturity, but I didn't really relate to Danny or see the character as someone who was obsessed with the genre. Sure, he knows the tropes and points out the errors, but he did need to be more of a smartass, and the production design needed to show he was a film fanatic. For example, his room should be full of movie posters and magazines, like the kid in Joe Dante's Matinee. It needed more dialogue of him spouting film trivia and driving others around him completely bonkers, because that's all he can talk about. The film showcases the love, escapism and magic of cinema. Danny's local theatre, despite its run-down nature, looks amazing. It's what cinemas used to look like and should always look like. And as the kid has access to the projection room where Nick works, it was always fascinating to me to see that, and probably got me intrigued to become a projectionist myself. The relationship between Danny and Nick is very sweet. They both share this love of cinema, and Nick, even at his old age, is a bit immature, and since he was a child his whole life has revolved around this cinema, making it his home, and he is more than happy to project his enthusiasm onto Danny. Arnold certainly looks the best he's ever looked on film, rocking a mighty tan and in fantastic shape. He had already dabbled with comedy movies with Kindergarten Cop and Twins a couple of years before, and now gets to flex his comedic skills once again, and probably delivers his best comedic performance with some great lines.
Help me!
You've seen those movies where they say, make my day, or I'm your worst nightmare. Well, listen to this one. Rubber baby buggy bumpers.
For fans wanting some exciting action from Arnold, as this was why you went to the cinema to see him, his whole career was built on the action genre. Despite a good opening act with Slater narrowly avoiding being blown up and then being chased, the film rarely hits the dizzying heights of, say, Predator or Terminator 2 in terms of pure carnage and spectacle. Out that year was Hard Target by John Woo, which easily tops the action displayed in Last Action Hero. But the real star of the film for me is Charles Dance, who steals every scene he is in, superb delivery to all his dialogue, and to be honest, he does get some of the best lines in the film and takes full advantage of it, making what could have been a forgettable villain into one that is fondly remembered. A role originally intended for Alan Rickman, but I couldn't imagine anyone else playing Benedict. It fits Charles's style of acting perfectly.
I've just shot somebody! I did it on purpose!
When it comes to John McTiernan's direction, he certainly brings over his excellent visual eye, and with Dean Semler's excellent lighting, the film looks great throughout. John is incredibly harsh on himself in the audio commentary, which he recorded for the recent release on Blu-ray and 4K. He shoulders a lot of the blame, which is not entirely his fault. Due to the tight schedule and constant script changes, no one stopped to think and say, is this the right direction? Everything seems done on the fly. And the end result is a whiplash effect on the tone and direction. For what is supposed to be a kids' movie, it's a PG-13, i.e. a 15 for the UK, so a large majority of kids can't see it. Arnold was very adamant that the violence should be toned down, especially with the merchandise and video games, so you have a movie that is toned down for children, but not enough for them to actually see it. It's also a pretty dark movie and depressing in places. It opens with Slater's child being killed, and once Danny enters the movie world and comes to realise that Slater doesn't have a great life as he pretends his wife is still calling him, etc., it becomes very downbeat. The sense of fun begins to erode from the story. Then once we enter New York, the fun stops completely, as this grimy and gritty dark side of the Big Apple is on full display. We've now entered the seedy New York that dominated cinema of the 1970s and 80s. Then the movie repeats the ending of Jack Slater 3, with Danny being in the same position as Slater's son. It ends up being an underwhelming face-off between Slater and the Ripper, and eventually Benedict. Oddly, you don't see Charles Dance or Bridget Wilson at the premiere. Danny could have used Charles to get a one-up on Benedict for the finale, to compromise his plan. There is still a lot of fun to be had with Last Action Hero. It just falls a bit flat when it comes to having fun with its main premise, and spends too much time in the real world, where the whole concept of being in a movie, the most interesting part, comes to a standstill. However, the comedy really works. The action has its moments, but doesn't quite match the level of Terminator 2 or even True Lies the following year. As a kid, I wasn't hyped by the marketing, so I wasn't misled in any way, but with the name Last Action Hero, I was kind of expecting more with the action, wanting it to be crazy and over the top, and what McTiernan wanted, more magical. I think fundamentally it takes itself too seriously come the third act. It does get a tad bogged down with the cameos, which aren't really needed. It makes sense for the cameos in Roger Rabbit, it fits the narrative, but Last Action Hero is just pointing at people you may recognise. I still find it amusing MC Hammer pops up. I swear in 1993 he wasn't popular anymore. And Jim Belushi appearing made me chuckle. Yeah, he co-starred with Arnold in Red Heat, but this cameo was the only thing he did in 1993, which is also the same for Chevy Chase. I think they probably didn't get the stars they wanted and had to grab ones who weren't really working or were happy to turn up because they were going to be in an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, like Van Damme. If you have an interest in action movies, then I'm pretty sure you've seen Last Action Hero. It's either seen as a somewhat of a mediocre movie that failed to deliver, or one that people adore. I rarely meet anyone who hated it, unless they were of an age when it came out and were hyped by the marketing and the end results let you down big time. That's totally understandable. For me, nostalgia plays a big part. I remember when it came out and having a few of the toys and revisiting it at an older age and appreciating it. I think the film is really fascinating down to the studio's mismanagement, the production being rushed and plagued with constant script changes, and the marketing pushing a movie that was hoping to outdo the success of Terminator 2. When rewatching it, you always think what this film could have been if the studio had more faith in the original script and didn't push it to be the biggest movie of 1993. It's all hindsight now, and what we were given is still really enjoyable, despite a few nagging issues. After 30 years, people are still talking about the film, and it's surprising there hasn't been anything quite like it since. Ready Player One comes kind of close, but it's a fine example of taking a high concept, attach a big star, throw loads of money at it, and spend big with the marketing. But things didn't go to plan, the big gamble of movie making. I think if they didn't overhype it and focused on the story instead of the spectacle, then I think it would have been received more warmly by the critics, and shown that Arnold could step out of the R-rated action movie genre into a PG-13 without losing his core audience and instead gaining a new fan base who appreciated seeing him do something very different. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.